COVID victims remembered as death rate falls. Photos before lockdown. This is it. This is the last one.
Frank Turner.
Singer Frank Turner is among those who are sharing their memories of life before lockdown. He has shared a photo from his tour bus after performing his last gig in Southend.
Southend, Essex.
Southend, Essex. A few days before the first UK lockdown on the 23rd of March 2020, Turner says they were feeling more and more uneasy about the situation, and during this particular gig, he turned to his guitar technician and said, "This is it. This is the last one." After the gig, After the gig, we agreed we couldn't and shouldn't carry on, he says. It was a really sad moment, but we thought it would probably only be for a couple of months. We never thought it would be over a year. BBC Video 5 Live and BBC Breakfast are asking people to share their memories while the hashtag. It fills me with a sense of loss and longing. Musician Frank Turner chats to Rachel Burden about life before lockdown, and the last picture on his phone taken on his tour bus before March 23rd, 2020. What's yours? What's the roadmap for lifting lockdown? There's been a lot of speculation in recent days around whether coronavirus rules on travel will be lifted to allow summer holidays abroad. So, what is the timetable for easing restrictions? The latest relaxation of rules in England is on 29 March, when people will be allowed to meet outside, either with one other household or within the rule of 6, including in private gardens. There's when a £5,000 fine for anyone in England trying to travel abroad without good reason is due to come into force next week as part of new coronavirus laws. The penalty is included in legislation that will be rolled on by MPs on Thursday. April 12 is when the government's travel task force will report back on whether foreign travel can resume on that is earlier date of May of 17. It's also when shops, hairdressers and gyms could be open, and restaurants and pubs could be allowed to serve food and alcohol to customers sitting outdoors. Here's our guide to the roadmap out of lockdown. Each step is dependent on meeting certain criteria, and Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland have their own plans for lifting lockdown. COVID deaths lower since October in England and Wales. The weekly coronavirus death figures in England and Wales are at their lowest since October, according to the Office of National Statistics. A total of 1,501 deaths registered in the week ending on the 12th of March, mentioned COVID-19 on the death certificate, the lowest number since the week ending October 30. The figure is down 29% on the previous week's total, the ONSA. Around 1 in 7, 13.7% of all deaths registered in England and Wales in the week to the 12th of March mentioned COVID-19 on the death certificate. On Monday, the UK recorded 17 deaths in the 38 days following a positive coronavirus test. This was the lowest daily death rate since September 2020. UK considering traffic light systems for overseas travel. The government's Global Travel Task Force is considering a tiered or traffic light system for international travel when the ban on leaving the country is lifted. The discussion is focusing on what restrictions would apply to travelers returning from destinations in the lowest level. How green is green, in the words of one advisor. Health Secretary Matt Hancock told the Today program earlier that the government had to take into account rising cases in Europe. It is reasonable to take a precautionary and careful approach, which is what we are doing as the Brothers. He said there were no current plans to put all of Europe on the so-called red list, from which travel into the UK is banned. British nationals and people who are normally residents in the UK returning from these countries have to enter hotel quarantine upon arrival. The intention is to publish the framework on the 12th of April, with decisions about which countries are in which tier to be taken later. The Prime Minister's roadmap for lifting the lockdown says international travel could resume from the 17th of May, but officials cannot guarantee this will happen. Testing for children who travel is being considered because there are no plans for under 18s to be vaccinated. Read our explainer here on when summer holidays may be allowed. National Day of Reflection trends on Twitter. The hashtag National Day of Reflection is trending on Twitter as the UK marks a year since the first coronavirus lockdown. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer used the hashtag to tweet that he would be taking part in a minute's silence to remember all those who have lost their lives in the pandemic. He tweeted, "As we mark 1 year since our country entered the first lockdown, my thoughts are with all those who have lost loved ones since the pandemic began. Today at 12 p.m., I will join people across our country to observe a minute's silence on this National Day of Reflection." Germany in new pandemic. We can now bring you more from Germany, where lockdown measures have been extended for a further 3 weeks after a surge in coronavirus infections. German Chancellor Angela Merkel announced the new restrictions on Tuesday morning after marathon crisis talks with regional leaders. The Chancellor said Germany was in a very serious situation, leaving the country racing against time to roll out coronavirus vaccinations. Merkel said the highly contagious UK variant of coronavirus had become dominant in Germany, plunging the country into what she called a new pandemic. Essentially, we have a new virus, Merkel said. It is much deadlier, much more infectious, and infectious for much longer. Some research does suggest the UK variant may be associated with a higher risk of death. Compulsory vaccines extra burden on care sector. Compulsory, 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 compulsory,
Compulsory.
Compulsory vaccines extra burden on care section. Compulsory COVID vaccinations for care home staff could put an extra burden on an already understaffed sector, the chief executive of the Royal College of Nursing said. Dame Donna Kenya told BBC Video 5 Live, "It's always been a fundamental human right that we have autonomy over that goes into our bodies. The most important thing is making sure that all healthcare workers get access to the vaccine," she says. A survey by the LCN found of those who haven't received a vaccine, 70% were healthcare staff working outside of hospital who hadn't even been offered it. She says, "It's a society where we know that care homes are struggling to get people to work for them, to put an extra burden on them, seems a bit conflicting, really." Dame Kenya volunteered at night grade hospitals and says, although they will never throw 40 patients in a row on ventilators was Christ-starting. She says, "I have been personally moved by the efforts and the stories I have heard of the people who have continued to nurse and thank them for the skill and professionalism. No plans to put all of Europe on travel red list. Health Secretary Matt Hancock says there are currently no plans to put all of Europe on the travel red list, amid a third wave of cases in countries such as France and Italy. As a month-long lockdown returned to several French regions, including Paris, Health Minister Laurent Fabius raised the prospect of having to red list all of our European neighbors. Mr. Hancock tells LBC, "We don't have any plans to do that. We do have this red list and the amber list, and at the moment that is working well, so we don't have plans to do that. People from red list countries are currently not allowed to travel to the UK, with the exception of British nationals and people who are normally resident in the UK, but those two groups must pay to quarantine in a hotel if they do choose to come at the moment. Here's our guide to testing, quarantine, and red list." What are the Easter restrictions in Germany? As we've been reporting, Germany will impose an almost complete shutdown over the Easter holidays in response to a third wave of coronavirus infections. Existing measures such as the closure of sporting facilities will remain in place until the 18th of April, Then, for 5 days from the 1st of April, Germans are being asked to stay at home and reduce contacts. In-person religious services are cancelled. Big family gatherings are banned, with no more than 2 households or up to 5 people allowed to meet. All shops are shut, apart from food shops on the 3rd of April. An emergency break will halt further reopenings in areas where infections exceed 100 new cases per 100,000 people over a 7-day period.